Travelers, it's Jay here. Today I'm going to bring you my 1.0 starter build guide. This is what I'm going to be playing over the next couple days for the release of 1.0. It is a Bleed Hammer Throw Paladin. This is my go-to for any kind of starting scenario because it doesn't require any gear and it scales very well with gear. It does a really good single target thanks to Volatile Reversal, and because we're a Paladin, we have access to Holy Aura, which allows us to get really good resistances early on. So I can't recommend it enough. I was waiting to make this video until patch notes released, and unfortunately I actually waited a little bit too long because right now I'm having to record it off of my Twitch gameplay rather than actual in-game footage that I would like to show you because the servers are down. But that's not too big of a problem. As you can see, the gameplay is pretty fast-paced for a damage over time build. We're just throwing out hammers, zooming around with lunge, reversaling, maybe using sigils if there's a big enemy. Again, reversaling on the bigger rares to increase the damage. Alright, now you've seen some gameplay, let's go and look at the planners. Alright, here we are. So this is the initial starting planner here. This is the no uniques, full rares. Should be able to get all this just playing through the game, farming your monos while you work towards the end game variant with uniques. This covers all the skills, the passives, and blessings, so you got everything all in one place. Really cool. I love the LE planner. Damn it, did an amazing job, and he keeps it updated every time there's a new patch. Right, let's start with the skills, as arguably they're the most important. Holy Aura. This is basically the only way you really build Holy Aura. With this, we're getting 40% elemental res, 15% endurance. Amazing for the early game when you have no res in your gear. We also get a little bit of poison res here and ailment cleanse, which means we don't need it on our belt, but it's still good to have it on your belt. Now, in terms of priority nodes, I usually put about 3 points in here first. Then I head over to get the haste chance with throwing attacks. Then back over to get the elemental res. And I usually take either this node or these nodes here last. Really, it's up to you. Doesn't make a huge amount of difference. Hammer throw. Now you can level with hammer throw. You get this at character level 3, as you can see here, and it will do a really good job all the way through the campaign. It's probably the second best way to level a sentinel. It's usually what I level my sentinels with, if not warpath. So what you do in terms of priority nodes is you go up through winged hammers and steadfast path. I usually grab Iron Spiral, then I head over down to Ballista to get the minus mana cost. Usually I only put 1 point here, and then about 2 to 3 points here before heading down to get weighted hammers for the more damage multiplier. Then when you feel like, oh, you know, you're not having to sit on top of mobs for quite as long, it would be better to be a bit more mobile. You hop back, you grab Hammer Vortex so the hammers now spin around you so you can keep moving along with the hammers alongside you. Now, we have a level 22 Hammer Throw here, so we're getting 2 extra passives. The final 2 passives, you just stick them into Rapid Throw for more attack speed. More attack speed, more single target, allows you to stack those bleeds faster and to a higher level. Sigils. Again, Sigils, very generic skill tree here. Even after the nerf, Sigils is just, it's so good, it's so strong. In terms of priority nodes, you get 4 points into Empowering Sigils, you grab Last Wish ASAP. You go 2 points into Iron Sigils. This used to give increased armor, now it only gives increased endurance threshold, which is still okay, but it's not worth dumping 5 points into. Then I like to go over into Sign of the Guardian for that block chance and block effectiveness, but if you're not manually casting, this isn't that important. I would max out the endurance first, or not endurance, sorry, the duration, then hop up into Tetragram for the extra sigil, and you can take these points last, or you can switch that around depending upon if you like the active playstyle of actually keeping your sigils topped up. Volatile Reversal. Now, I tweaked this a little bit recently because generally what you do with Volatile Reversal is you take all the more damage mods, because with these two Void Rifts here, it means when you hit an enemy, you get the 60% increased enemy damage over time taken, and then the 30% enemy damage taken, which is generic damage that includes damage over time. So that's a 90% more multiplier. But with the two rifts, this stacks, so you get 180% more damage. Huge. We want the mana back so we aren't getting the really high cooldown, which is what made me switch out. I used to have 3 points here for the global attack speed, but our cooldown is so low, or our cooldown is so long on Volatile Reversal that I was finding it smoother to drop out of those nodes, put one extra here, and then the two here for a faster cooldown. With my gear in game, I had about an 8-second cooldown on Volatile Reversal, which I'm used to like a 2-second cooldown on Reversal and basically spamming it. 8 seconds feels kind of bad to me, but I know a lot of people really don't like Reversal, so that's probably better that they're not having to hit it all that often. Really, you can get away with just using it on boss fights. Sorry about that, my mic died. So yeah, what you do, at the start of the boss, you get out 4 sigils, you hit Volatile Reversal to get all your mana back. The boss is now taking 180% more damage over time, and your bleeds will just churn through their health bar. And finally, Smite. Now, the Smite tech is amazing. Dread came up with this. It's a really good idea. We're running 2 Smite on throwing attack idols. So every time our hammer throw hits, we have an 18% chance, with max rolled idols of course, to proc a smite. And because we're not a crit build, we don't have to go into all the base crit stuff. So we're able to max out the lightning bolts, which makes clearing with this skill really nice, because the clearers was always a little iffy with just pure damage hammer throw, especially on this variant with the projectile speed being lowered. So the smites really help pick up the little stragglers, and we're getting the huge 250% more damage, which also applies to the bleeds inflicted by smite. So yeah, smite tech, amazing. I love it. Feels really good. All right, on to the passives. Let's start with base Sentinel. This is pretty standard base Sentinel. You usually max out Juggernaut, which this patch got buffed. We now get even more res from it, which is really nice. It gives us just a little bit, pushing us over the edge, making it a bit easier to cap that fire and void res without heavy investment elsewhere. Fearless, you usually max this as well because 8 vitality and some increased health regen is really nice. 1 point for the block. Armorclad, this is like the only less damage taken in Sentinel, so every build runs this. Then here we got a little bit of cooldown recovery for movement skill that helps our lunge, because you don't need smite on your bar, you run lunge instead, and a little bit of health. And then up here, this is global attack speed, so when you're using an axe, we get 30% increased attack speed, feels really good. Forge Guard, just the 1 point for the block effectiveness. Void Knight, Abyssal Endurance for the health, void, and fizz res. Now, Paladin, our mastery. There's a lot to talk about here. So, in terms of priority nodes, this one is the one you always max out first. Lots of increased damage and penetration. Penetration essentially works like a more damage multiplier. Here we got Necro Res and Health. That makes capping on Necro Res very easy with just like a Bone Amulet. Doesn't even have to be rolled well because this has 49%. Here we're getting some Endurance. That allows us, along with the nodes inside of Holy Aura, to basically cap our Endurance without any kind of investment. Now, Penance. This is basically the whole reason we even go Paladin. Lots of bleed chance on throwing. Up here, we have Sanctuary Guardian for a lot of armor while we're using a shield. We're basically always using a shield. I'll talk about that a little more when we get to the gear. Shield Wall, more block chance, health gain on block. That really helps us sustain early on before we have things like Bleeding Heart or Valdir's for the leech. Now, the best node here for bleed, physical penetration with bleed 49%. That is huge. That is a lot of damage. And then 49% chance to be granted damage, and you get 49% increased. That increases for both physical and damage over time. Not quite sure why it works like that, but yeah, this node, a lot of damage. And now here, a little bit more increased damage and some increased health. Nice little node there. And let's look at the gear. So because this is a planner, the gear is essentially perfect. You know, take it with a grain of salt. Your gear is not going to be this amazing. My gear isn't this amazing. And I don't expect it to be any time in the next probably month or so. We'll add in exalted items as we find them throughout our playtime, along with sealing affixes. Every single piece of gear has a sealed affix on this planner. Just try and hit what you can. It's not the end of the world if you end up with only a 4 mod rare. Rares are still very strong in Last Epoch, and you'll find rares that you can use just on the floor. You won't, and as well as crafting on top of those bases. So the axe is very simple. Increased damage, chance to bleed, and then chill and slow. Chill and slow are really good defensive modifiers for the build. Chill reduces attack and enemy movement speed. Slow only reduces enemy movement speed, but they do stack. Oh, and you want a Dragonbone axe as the base for the chance to bleed on hit. You can also, if you're part of the Merchant's Guild, I'm going Circle of Fortune personally, but if you're Merchant's Guild, you can get a Resplendent axe, which has the same amount of chance to bleed, but at a much lower level requirement, so something to consider maybe for all my trade Andes out there. Now, the helmet. This is a new base added in this patch. Reduced bonus damage taken from critical strikes. That removes the need to stack any critical strike avoidance and is the reason we are no longer running the Faith Armor node. The increased armor would be nice, but I personally think I value freeing up crit avoidance affixes elsewhere. So, because we're a bleed build, we want the chance to bleed on hit, wielding an axe, the fizz damage and bleed duration. Bleed duration is a massive more multiplier for the build because the more bleed stacks you can have on the target, the more damage you're doing at any one time. Physical penetration. I've chosen physical penetration for the sealed affix because it has the lowest gain in value based on tiers, and you can only seal an affix up to tier 4. And then double health on the suffixes. You'll notice that is a theme on a lot of pieces of gear. Chest is very similar, except for the suffixes where we went with a % increased armor affix. You could also do that on the helmet if you wanted, instead of the flat, and just try and increase this armor value here. We actually have quite a lot of armor with this variant of the build because the base types have gained a lot of armor over what we were using previously. Bone Amulet. Bone Amulet is basically the best amulet in the game. Everybody uses this. The up to 40% Fizz and Necro Res is huge. Allows you to cap your resistances very easily. So you can see here, our res is way overcapped, and there's not really a whole lot you can do about that. As a Paladin, you just end up overcapped. And this isn't even counting all of the Holy Aura stuff. It only counts the ones you get from the base, not the actual ones inside the skill. And then, so we're just rocking lots of increased damage, health, a little bit of res. I've sealed chance to apply frailty. You can kind of switch that around. Doesn't matter too much because you can get frailty elsewhere. Shield. Shield is nice and plain. Lots of block chance, block effectiveness, reduced damage taken on block. And then we got health. That can also be armor, which think you would have to look at the you would have to look in calculations to see if you gain more effective HP versus health over armor, but just for the sake of simplicity, I went with health. And then for the sealed affix, we went with health gain on block. You can switch the block effectiveness and health gain on block as sealed affixes around. Like it's not the end of the world which one you have there. The health gain on block is very nice early on, much like in the Paladin passives, just keeping our health topped up early game before we have a source of leech, especially against chip damage. The rings, I'm going with opal rings for the increased cooldown recovery speed. You can also use these if you're in the Merchant's Guild, the Mercantile Insignia. You could use a ruby ring if you need to cap fire res. coral ring for more vitality, or a silver ring if you just want to go fast. Silver rings are nice. I do like silver rings. The belt. This is a new base added this patch. The Praetorian belt. Lots of flat armor. We're going to have a lot of armor this patch. A lot of armor. So that's going to help us quite a bit, especially because I've got to mention for the body armor, but we get a percentage of armor mitigation also applies to damage over time. So it's very worthwhile stacking armor nice and high to get more value out of that mitigation, because damage over time will kill you very quickly. Poison and bleeds and frostbite are quite overtuned against players. We talked about the belt. Rings, let's actually talk about the affixes on them. Increased damage over time or fizz damage, doesn't matter, either or. Throwing attack speed to get those hammers out as fast as possible. Health, block chance, block effectiveness. You don't need the block chance, block effectiveness if you would prefer a resistance in that slot, or if you don't have a good helmet base, you could run crit avoid to cap your crit avoidance. The only thing that really matters is that you have at least tier 1 throwing damage and throwing mana cost. We need the minus mana cost on both rings to make the mana of hammer throw low enough to be able to sustain it. You generally seal it because it only needs to be tier 1, but you can get rid of the damage over time and just have it crafted on if you're early on and you don't have the Glyphs of Despairs to seal it, but it's always more worthwhile to have that reduced mana cost than an increased damage, but it's not worthwhile skipping over the throwing attack speed over increased damage. So always have minus mana cost, always have throwing attack speed, and then increased damage over time or increased physical damage is a luxury attribute. Gloves, kind of similar. Increased throwing attack speed, increased damage over time. Hybrid health, one of the only places you can get hybrid health, so definitely want that on your gear. And then block chance or health, you can switch either of those around. You can also get frailty on gloves. Boots, this is a new boot base added this patch. So we're getting increased effect of haste, which is really nice because as a paladin from our holy aura tree, we get chance to gain haste on throwing attack hit. So movement speed, you always want movement speed in your boots. Vitality, more HP. Hybrid health, again, one of the only places you can get hybrid HP along with your belt and your gloves. And then we're topping off our reduced bonus damage taken from crits by getting a tier 5 roll on boots. You only need one. You could also get it on your belt, which for the belt, we're going increased physical damage, increased mana regen. It's nice to have increased mana regen somewhere on your gear. You could also get it on a ring, but it's better to get it on the belt. And then just double life suffixes, and we've sealed the cleanse. You don't need the cleanse because we do gain it from the holy aura node here, but it is nice to have a backup if your holy aura is on cooldown. And finally, our relic. Argent Crest is the way to go. There are some other options like Solarum Banner, or I believe one of the... Nope, they didn't add any new ones. I thought they did, but yeah, so really it's just Argent Crest or Solarum Banner. If you're really over res capped, it might be better to go for the block chance and the health gain on block. And here's where we're getting our plus to level of Hammer Throw. This is a rare affix, so if you can't get it, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. You just run increased physical damage over time and increased damage over time. Then we got health. This is where we're getting our chance to apply frailty on hit. And then, just because I needed a tiny little bit, I sealed tier 1 void res, but even if you were at 72% void res, it wouldn't be what kills you. You could get away without that. But the sealed affix on your relic can really be used for a lot of things, just to kind of cap those last little bit of resistances. And now, let's take a look at idols. So these are the big ones in the build that are giving us most of our single target, honestly. The increased bleed duration is huge, and really, I like to run these ones. So increased bleed duration and increased physical damage over time. I like to have 4 of those, just for as much damage as possible, but I have some other options here: block effectiveness, health, elemental res, and then the ones for the chance to cast Smite on hit with throwing attacks, or Smidles, as I like to call them. Chance to cast Smite on throwing attack, 4 to 9% chance. Really, you want as high as possible, and you can have either health, block effectiveness, specific resistances. I think you can get fire res on here, or like I like, just increase physical damage over time. 2 of those, and you get a really insane amount of damage on this build. This build does really good single target, and I mean the clear is fine because you stack so many bleeds. But the single target is a lot better than you might expect from a damage over time build, especially a bleed build, if you're used to a game like Path of Exile where bleed is generally, quite underpowered. And last but not least, blessings. I'm going for the Adorned Idol drop rate because I want to get those Smidles as fast as possible, and they are a little bit on the rarer side. Next, we've got the Health Leech Rate Blessing. This is going to help us stay topped up once we get a source of leech. You can also go for the, where is it? Health gain on block. In fact, that's probably better. I might change that. Or you could even just get more health. That would give us, in optimized gear, almost 4200 HP. So yeah, that's pretty open, but I do think the health gain on block is actually the way to go early on until you have a form of leech. And now, this has changed. It used to just be up to 200% health regen, which was already good, but now it actually gives you some flat. That combined with sigils, which gives you health regen as well, will actually give us a pretty good form of sustain early on. Overall, this build has had some pretty significant buffs this patch because it hasn't had any nerfs. And between the base types and the blessing changes, it's looking pretty good. So, chance to bleed on hit. Do I really need to explain why this is good? more bleed stacks, more bleed chance, more bleed stacks. Unlike Path of Exile, where you get 100% bleed and then you're always applying a bleed, in Last Epoch, you can stack bleeds indefinitely based on your duration. So if you have 500% chance to bleed on hit, every time you hit with a attack that can bleed, you'll apply 5 stacks. If you have 550% chance, you'll have a 50% chance to apply 6. Now, the block chance, block effectiveness blessing that's another one that's kind of up to personal preference. You can either go for the block chance, block effectiveness, or you could go for increased armor. They did nerf this patch, but I was already running the block chance one anyway. But really, just take whatever you can get. You can also go for physical shred early on, but if you have any kind of physical penetration on your gear, it's better to go for a defensive option. And finally, Spirits of Fire timeline, flat armor. Flat armor is really strong. At the moment we have 5,560, and if I take it off, we go down to 4,894. So yeah, we're getting a lot of armor out of that, which is a lot of mitigation, and a lot of mitigation to dots from our chest piece. So we've covered the non-unique version. Let's go and take a look at a version with uniques. So this is what you would go for when you really want to push the top end scaling of the build. We're going Salt the Wound, which is the unique item I designed personally. And this is how you really scale the top end damage of a bleed or poison build. Especially for something like this, where we're not able to get all the attack speed from things like wing guards or attack speed on your weapons. So we do have to change the way we're gearing a little bit, because the way Salt the Wound works is you gain a percentage of added critical strike multiplier as physical penetration with bleed. So on a max rolled one, you would get 50%. So what we do is we drop the damage over time affix on our axe, and we get critical strike multiplier instead. Now for the other uniques, Bleeding Heart and Valdir's Chalice, we'll cover those in a minute, but you could get a legendary affix, you could get critical strike multiplier, and then you could really start scaling the build a lot, because you already get up to 40% critical strike multi on the gloves, and then you can get another 40 on your axe. That can go up to like 60 if it's exalted, or even higher. So it can start getting really silly very quickly. You'll very easily be able to get like an extra 100 physical penetration, which is essentially 100% more damage with bleed. We're also going to drop 1 point in Paladin and move it over to Void Corruption for an extra 11% crit multi. It's not insane, but that's another 5, or it might be 6 physical pen with rounding. I'm not sure how Last Epoch does it. But yeah, so Salt the Wound, with the added critical strike multiplier scaling, you can get hundreds of extra physical penetration with bleed. It really is the way to scale your damage if you want to push it as far as you possibly can. Now, Bleeding Heart. This will probably be the very first unique you add into the build. It's just a very cheap, easy source of global damage leached as health. That includes all the damage from your hits and your damage over time, so your bleeds. You can also get legendary potential relatively easily on this. They did make it harder this patch, but it's still quite attainable to get a 2 to 3 LP one with the new corruption scaling, increasing the chance to get legendary potential on gear. The next unique you might add into the build is Valdez Chalice. This thing's really strong. It's got extra chance to bleed on hit, increased bleed duration. We already talked about why those nodes are so good, but the bleed, extra bleed stacks, bleed duration, they last longer. And then it's got the physical damage over time, damage leached as health, so that just stacks on top of Bleeding Heart to give you even more leech. And then the really, really strong node here, or passive, sorry, which is really good while clearing monoliths, and in arena, the health gained on kill per stack of bleed on the target. So if you have like a couple 100 stacks of bleed on the target, you're just going to top yourself up as soon as you kill a mob. So yeah, Valdez Chalice, really nice for sustain. In fact, once you get it, you don't even really need Bleeding Heart, but Bleeding Heart is nicer for single target sustain. Blood of the Exile. These boots were added in the Runemaster patch, the previous one, and these things are insane. Huge movement speed, huge bleed duration, and then the more physical ailment damage to moving enemies. Enemies are pretty much always moving in this game, so this is just a huge more damage multiplier. These boots are so good. I genuinely can't believe these didn't get nerfed. Really, really good boots. And then Flayer's Pride. This is one of my favorite uniques in the game currently. I really like it. I like that it combines defenses and offense. So it's a shield, but you've got the bleed chance and the physical penetration with bleed. It's quite tough to get legendary potential on this though. It comes from Abomination in the very first Monolith timeline. But yeah, really, really good shield. One of the things you should aim to get first in your build once you get to empowered monos. Start farming empowered abomination, get the shield. It's basically like dual wielding with none of the downsides. But yeah, Salt the Wound is your kind of end goal and will be the item that will probably take you the longest to get. But once you get it, you can totally switch up your gearing on the build, really scale your damage into the end game. So yeah, I think that about covers it. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. I hope I answered pretty much any questions you might have, but if there are any, please just leave them in the comments or come over to my Twitch, twitch.tv/jtheproduct, and any and all questions, I'll answer them. You can watch me progress or progress alongside me. I'll probably be hosting relatively open lobbies if people want to jump in and just blast. I'm always down for some multiplayer action. So yeah, I'm really hyped. I hope you are too. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.